2-week interlude from our series, The Story, where we were going from the beginning in Genesis, making our way through the entire Old Testament. We took it for Holy Week and then for Easter, but now we're jumping back. And just sort of as a refresher, when we left off in our series with The Story, we were coming to the end of King David's life. So we're about to make a handoff, a transition between King David and his handing over leadership to his son by the name of Solomon. Now when David hands over the transition, the reins of the kingdom to his son, there's a lot of things that are sort of going on behind the scenes that will be important for you to know. And as we walk through the story, I'm going to try and hit some of those as best I can. But one of the things that I think would be important for us on the front end to consider is there's so much that was written about King David. I mean, probably more than anybody else, or definitely more than anybody else in the Scriptures, there is more about David, perhaps say Jesus, than anybody else. So there's a lot of stuff that we know about David, but when he's handing over the reins now to his son, there's probably a lot less that we know about his son Solomon. So just as we're getting started, maybe we could put our heads together, and for all the collective wisdom we might have about this man Solomon, let's talk about a few things that we know about him. Okay? So, talk to me about what we know about Solomon.
He was the richest man in the world.
He was very rich. He was very wise. Good combo. You need that with that. All right? He was rich and he was wise. And what else?
Handsome.
Handsome? Yeah, I think he was handsome. He loved the ladies.
Very good dress.
Well-dressed man,
Jesus salutes to that.
He built the temple.
That's good. He was the first one to architect and build the temple in Israel. Okay. Anything else?
You better be good. I'm not married. I would have been divorced.
Yes. Anything else about Solomon? He was not firstborn. He technically wasn't supposed to be the one who was to receive this, but Bathsheba made a last-ditch attempt as David was on his deathbed to kind of twist his arm and make sure that her son Solomon would be the one to be king. Okay, that's good for now. We'll stop there. Okay, so we know a few things about Solomon. It's about 970 BC, so we celebrated Easter last week. It's about 1,000 years prior to Easter. Okay? And if you have your copy of the story, it's the bottom of page 176 where we'll get started. David is dying, and he is transitioning leadership over to his son, and this is his last speech to his son. It said, well, actually, let me just skip forward from there. He had this long speech where he tells him the importance of being obedient to the things that he's been taught, to the commands of God. It's almost like in every other transition you've seen prior to now, there's always this last and final speech. It's just kind of like things that these people have learned over the course of their life, and they're trying to pass on to the next one so that they don't make as many mistakes as the one before. Because David was a great king, but let's face it, he had some fatal flaws. He had a lot of character flaws that really kind of muddied his reign as king, even though he was the greatest king in all of Israel. So he gives this great speech, he dies, and then the baton is passed to Solomon, and it says, at the bottom of page 176, Solomon showed his love for the Lord by walking according to the instructions given him by his father David, except that he offered sacrifices and burned incense on the high places. The king went to Gibeon to offer sacrifices, for that was the most important high place, and Solomon offered 1,000 burnt offerings on that altar. That's a lot. That would take some time, don't you think? He was worshiping for a while, 1,000. Okay. At Gibeon, the Lord then appeared to Solomon. He had some time to do so. And he appeared during the night in a dream, and God said to him, "Ask for whatever you want me to give you, if God came to you and gave you that opportunity, I want you to think for a second about what you might actually ask for. Not ideally ask for, but what you probably, if you in your most honest place, God said, anything you want, I'll give it to you. What would you like? Okay? Now this is a young man who has the opportunity as God comes to him to ask for anything he wants. Okay? Solomon answers. He says, "You have shown great kindness to your servant, my father David, because he was faithful to you, and righteous and upright in heart. You have continued his great kindness to him, and have given him a son to sit on his throne this very day. Now, Lord my God, you have made your servant king in place of my father David, but I am only a little child, and do not know how to carry out my duties. Your servant is here among the people you have chosen, a great people, too numerous to count or number. So give your servant a discerning heart to govern your people, and to distinguish between right and wrong. For who is able to govern this great people of yours?" So, of all the things that he could have received, or all the things that he could have asked, he said, I just need some wisdom. God, I'm just a little child. By the way, he's not being overly humble. You know how old he was? About 13. He's literally telling the truth. I'm just a kid. This is the age of my son Josh, King of Israel. I mean, really? And he's coming on the heels of the greatest king the nation had ever known. And he's lost. Can you imagine inheriting the kingdom and you're 13 years old? Wisdom is a good choice to ask for from God. So the Lord was pleased that Solomon had asked for this. So God said to him, "Since you have asked for this, and not for long life or wealth for yourself, nor have asked for the death of your enemies, but for discernment in administering justice, I will do what you have asked. I will give you a wise and discerning heart, so that there will never have been anyone like you, nor will there ever be." So God was pleased. He could have asked for anything, and God would have been on the hook because he promised that he would. But he sees something in this young man that is noble and is good, and he's going to bless him, right? So at the bottom of page 178 it says, God gave Solomon wisdom and very great insight, and a breadth of understanding as measureless as the sand on the seashore. That's pretty good. Next time you wonder about how much that is, go down to the beach and start counting. Solomon's wisdom was greater than the wisdom of all the people of the East, and greater than all the wisdom of Egypt. He was wiser than anyone else, including Ethan the Ezrahite, wiser than Heman, Calcol, and Darda, the sons of Mahol. You know who those guys were? Neither do I. I digress. And so his fame spread through all the surrounding nations. He spoke 3,000 proverbs, and his songs numbered 1,005. He spoke about plant life, from the cedar of Lebanon to the hyssop that grows out of the walls. This dude knew about stuff that's growing out of walls. People would come around and say, "Hey, what's that?" "Oh, I think that's hyssop. Let me tell you a little bit about the hyssop." I mean, he knows something about everything, right? He also spoke about animals and birds and reptiles and fish. From all the nations, people came to listen to Solomon's wisdom, sent by all the kings of the world who had heard of his wisdom. People are coming from all over the world to hear this guy speak. Can you imagine? That's incredible. He's 13 years old. And God's favor is resting on him. But see, this guy wasn't just content to be wise himself. He wanted to instruct his people in a way that would help them to grow to be wise. But he had to do it in such a way that he wasn't going to be like over their heads, right? Have you ever met somebody who's like totally brilliant, but you just don't understand anything they're saying? You know they're smart, and they know they're smart, but like there's some missing piece in the translation between them conveying their brilliance to you and your understanding it, right? So Solomon wanted his people to be smart too, right? Smarter than a 5th grader. So he wrote all these proverbs, these sayings, these points of wisdom, and I just want to share a few with you. We find these in the book of Proverbs. There's a few things. Unfortunately, he's going to lose touch with them himself, but I think it would be important for you to know as we're walking through, you might have your own favorite Proverbs, but these are a few of mine that he wrote down for some of the people to be aware of. He said, above all else, guard your heart, for everything you do flows from it. Sometimes we're careless with our hearts, and our hearts become divided. And when they become divided, there is great ruin in our life. And he says, you've got to make sure that you guard and protect your heart so that it's not trampled, right? So it's not muddy. Another one he wrote, those who guard their lips preserve their lives, but those who speak rashly will come to ruin. So be slow to speak and quick to listen. You can understand this whether you have a college degree or not, can't you? A gentle answer turns away wrath, but a harsh word stirs up anger. You're in a fight, the next time you're in a fight, somebody's stirring something up. Remember that even if they started it and they're at fault, a gentle answer turns away wrath. But a harsh word, what? It stirs it up more and more and more and more. It starts there and it ends up going even further, sometimes physical. Right? A gentle answer turns away wrath. Gracious words are like a honeycomb, sweet to the soul and healing to the bones. Our words, they're so important, right? The words we speak to one another. How about we just become a little more gracious? They're so sweet, like honeycomb. And they are. They're sweet to the soul and they're healing to the bones. I would imagine some of us are broken in places that need some healing. How about a kind and gracious word? A person without self-control is like a city with broken down walls. You understand what that means? A person without self-control is like a city. They're totally exposed. They're open to the enemy of every kind. They have no self-control. They're totally open and vulnerable to the enemy's advance. Without wood, a fire goes out. Without gossip, a quarrel dies down. This guy had so much wisdom, and he wanted to share it with his people so that they would be wise. It wasn't that he wanted to be the wise man and everybody come and revere him. He wanted his people to be wise. He wanted them to be the kind of people who modeled the kind of behavior so that when people came from miles and miles around, they not only looked at him, but they looked at the nation and they said, wow, God at work. Wow, what an amazing group of people. When they looked at them, they saw something different. They would be a set-apart community. You remember God's dream? God dreamed this for his people. He wanted his people to be gracious and kind and wise and loving. And so Solomon shared these things in such a way that he was trying to help them understand the significance of possessing wisdom themselves. It was a gift. He was passing it on. So we know Solomon for his wisdom. We also know him because he was the one who was the first one to architect and construct the temple in Israel, the place where God would live, would dwell. This took place in 966. This was 4 years in. So when he was 17 years old, he started constructing the temple. And this was a 7-year project, and it took over 180,000 different workers. If you read in 1 Kings, it goes into extravagant detail about what he did in building this temple. He wanted God to live in more than a tent. He wanted him to have a beautiful home. And so he brought people from all over, craftsmen and woodworkers and people who worked in metals and stones. He brought in the best of the best of the best to create this temple, and he spent 7 years doing so. Okay? And it says, when Solomon had finished the temple of the Lord and the royal palace, and had succeeded in carrying out all that he had in mind to do in the temple of the Lord and in his own palace, the Lord appeared to him at night and said, I have heard your prayer and have chosen this place for myself as a temple for sacrifices. Now my eyes will be open and my ears attentive to the prayers offered in this place. I have chosen and consecrated this temple so that my name may be there forever. My eyes and my heart will always be there. As for you, he says, if you walk before me faithfully as David your father did, and do all I command, and observe my decrees and laws, I will establish your royal throne. As I covenanted with David your father when I said, you shall never fail to have a successor to rule over Israel. But if you turn away and forsake the decrees and commands I have given you, and go off to serve other gods and worship them, then I will uproot Israel from my land, which I have given them, and I will reject this temple that I have consecrated for my name. I will make it a byword and an object of ridicule among all peoples. This temple will become a heap of rubble, and it will. All who pass by will be appalled and say, why has the Lord done such a thing to this land and to this temple? And people will answer, because they have forsaken the Lord, the God of their ancestors, who brought them out of Egypt, and have embraced other gods, worshiping and serving them. That is why he brought all of this disaster upon them. This is very similar to speeches he's given in the past, right? Just do the right thing. If you do the right thing, life will be good. If you don't do the right thing, life is not going to be good. Okay? So you're on pace. You have a good start. You're headed in the right direction. Just keep on going. Okay? But if you don't, this will happen. Now, why is this so important for him to know? Why is this so important for us to know? God does never, ever, any place in the Scriptures, is God unclear about what his desires are for us in our life together. It's never in any way unclear. Solomon would never have to go back and say, you know, I didn't get that. I missed that chapter in the book. I'm sorry, I was unaware that this was what you wanted. Very clear. God made very clear to him. The upside and the downside. So he gives them this speech. Now this is important for you to know as we'll move through, because later this will in fact happen. Okay? So people, what happened is people are coming from all over, right, to see and hear the wisdom of Solomon, the lavishness of the temple. They are amazed at what is going on in the day here in the kingdom of Israel. So they're coming from all over, including a glamorous queen from a neighboring nation by the name of Queen Latifah.
No.
Queen of Sheba, I'm sorry. Just seeing if you were paying attention. Queen of Sheba. So the Queen of Sheba comes because she's heard about Solomon and his relationship to the Lord. She came to test Solomon with hard questions. So here comes the queen, and she has all of these hard questions that she's going to like testing him. Yeah, I've heard you're so smart. How about this? How about that? How about this? Okay? Arriving at Jerusalem with a very great caravan with camels carrying spices, large quantities of gold, and precious stones, she came to Solomon and talked with him about all that she had on her mind. Wow. Now, do you have any idea how far she came? About 1,500 miles. She had some pretty important things on her mind that she had to talk about. Yes. She's come this long way to ask him some hard questions to see if he is as wise as she heard he is. So Solomon answered all her questions. Nothing was too hard for the king to explain to her. And when the Queen of Sheba saw all the wisdom of Solomon and the palace that he had built, the food on his table, the seating of his officials, the attending servants in their robes, his cupbearers, and the burnt offerings he made at the temple of the Lord, she was overwhelmed. She said to the king, "The report I heard in my own country about your achievements and your wisdom is true. But I didn't believe these things until I came and saw them with my own eyes. Indeed, not even half was told me in wisdom and wealth that you have far exceeded the report I heard. How happy your people must be. How happy your officials who continually stand before you and hear your wisdom. Praise be to the Lord your God, who has delighted in you and placed you on the throne of Israel. Because of the Lord's eternal love for Israel, he has made you king to maintain justice and righteousness." Do you see what's happening? This is a non-believer. This is a pagan who has come from a distant land. She worships other gods, but she comes and she sees Solomon and God's work in his life, and she praises his God. This is the dream, that God would attract people from near and far, and he would draw them, not because these people were known for what they did wrong, but for what they did right. And she was in awe, and she not only acknowledged it, she worshipped, she praised his God. This is exactly what God was wanting. He was blessing his people so that they would what? Be a blessing to the earth. Not that they would hoard and keep to themselves. Not that they would be stingy and lord over others. He was blessing them to be a blessing. You understand? This is what he does for us, those who know him. He blesses us to be a blessing to others. Okay? She was overwhelmed. And so word gets out as she starts to tweet, and she lets all of the other dignitaries know exactly what's going on. She hops on Facebook. She's got a couple pictures of the temple. She's showing everybody how awesome this is. And now all these people start flooding into Israel. Everybody's coming from all over. They want to know about this guy. They want to know about these people. Did I say something funny? I shouldn't have asked. So here they come, all of these dignitaries from all over the world, and they're wanting instruction from Solomon. And listen to what it says. The king had a fleet of trading ships at sea with the ships of Hiram, and once every 3 years it returned, carrying gold and silver and ivory and apes and baboons. What thing doesn't belong in this verse here? And gold and ivory and silver and apes and baboons. When you're reading that, you just stop and scratch your head and say, what? What do you give a king who has everything? You build a zoo! And you give him animals. Well, King Solomon was greater in riches and wisdom than all the other kings of the earth. The whole world sought audience with Solomon to hear the wisdom that God had put in his heart. The whole world sought audience with this young king. He's a teenager. He's a teenager. Wow. Year after year, everyone who came brought a gift, articles of silver and gold, robes, weapons, spices, horses, mules, whatever they had. Things are good for Solomon, aren't they? It's a good start. He's the richest in the land. He's the wisest in the land. Everybody's bringing him gifts. People revere him. Couldn't get any better, could it? Oftentimes when you're reading a story like this, you think this is too good to be true. And then you're right. Because somewhere along the way, what's going to happen is a misstep. Now, it doesn't all happen at once. You know, lives don't fall apart in a day. Little by little, there's this decline of this regression. You don't at first notice it. But over time, weeks, months, years, if you look back, you could say, I think I can see when I started to go off course here. Solomon's going to start to go off course, and he's not going to notice it. Nobody else is, because he's the smartest, wisest, richest person in the land. Who's going to hold him accountable? That's the problem with kings. Kings get to certain spots, and nobody holds them accountable. You and I might not be kings and queens, although we are royalty. Sometimes we get to places in our lives where we're not really accountable for the decisions we make. And it doesn't serve us well. Because what started as something little ends up as something big, and our lives begin to disintegrate. We don't know how we got there, but if we look back and we're honest with ourselves enough to know, we know that somewhere along the way, we turned aside from what God had for us. Solomon starts strong, but he's going to end poorly. Does anybody know why he's going to end poorly? He loved the ladies. He loved the ladies. He was a ladies' man.
He was lusting after ladies.
He did. Take a listen to the ladies that Solomon gathered in his harem. Bottom of page 191. King Solomon, however, loved many foreign women besides Pharaoh's daughter. Moabites, Ammonites, Edomites, Sidonians, and Hittites. Does anybody know anything about these guys? They are the enemies of Israel. They worship foreign gods. They were told never to intermarry with these people, ever, 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 ever. They were from nations about which the Lord had told the Israelites, you must not intermarry with them, because they will surely turn your hearts after their gods. Nevertheless, Solomon held fast to them in love. He had 700 wives of royal birth and 300 concubines.
Wow.
If you're counting at home, that makes 1,000. Now, I don't want to be judgmental or anything, but 1,000 wives seems a bit excessive. 1,000 wives! There are many jokes that could be inserted here. I will not. But I will just say 1,000 wives. And it says, and his wives led him astray. As Solomon grew old, his wives turned his heart after other gods, and his heart was not fully devoted to the Lord his God, as the heart of David his father had been. He followed Ashtoreth, the goddess of the Sidonians, and Molech, the detestable god of the Ammonites. This was the one where in worship they would burn their children to worship them. So he was following Molech. So Solomon did evil in the eyes of the Lord. He did not follow the Lord completely as David his father had done. You remember Proverbs 4:23, what it said? Above all else, what? Guard your heart, for it is the wellspring of life. It's where all good flows. He didn't guard his heart, did he? His wives were like, if we have to live here in Israel and we have to practice the customs, the least you could do is give us a little of this or a little of that. Let us build a little, statue. Let us build a little tower. Let us... And then it started there, and they were like, well, you never go with us to worship service anymore. You told us we could build it, but we want you to come with us. It started somewhere along the way, right? That's how it is. It starts someplace. It doesn't seem all that bad. Yeah, go up in the hills somewhere and pray your statues. That's fine. It doesn't end there, though, does it? It never ends there. What you need to know is that his heart was divided. And this is the problem. Because God had instructed him that if your heart becomes divided and you do the things that I've instructed you not to do, there's going to be consequences. I told you this before we got started. This should be no surprise to you. From the very beginning, I laid out to you how I wanted things to be. Why? Why? This isn't just about Solomon. And it's not just about you and me. The world does not revolve around us. Amazingly enough, it doesn't. God has a dream for his people. And he's the leader of this group of people. That nations have been coming from across the globe to see and hear and look at, and they were in awe. Now what are they going to look at? He's just like everybody else. He's just like everybody else. I'm thinking to myself this week as I'm reading this, I'm thinking about, God must be thinking to himself, can't I just get one? Can't I just get one Just one who will do what I ask them to do? Can I just get one who will trust me that if they walk in my way, it will be a way of blessing? Can I just get one? I gave him all the wisdom in the world. I gave him all the riches he could possess. I gave him everything his heart could desire. And this is what happens. Can I just get one? It's more than just about you and me. It's about us. It's about how our lives either draw people to the goodness and the graciousness of God, or they repel and confuse people. We can't say one thing and do another. Not consistently anyway, and hope that anyone could come and look and see anything worth emulating or having for themselves. This is a 1,000-year-old story, but it's practical for you and me. It's pertinent for us today. You would think as somebody gets older, they get wiser. He gets more foolish. He's at his peak of wisdom when he's like 14, 15 years old. It says here, as Solomon grew old, his wives turned his heart after other gods, and his heart was not fully devoted to the Lord his God. How could somebody so smart do something so stupid? You ever find yourself asking yourself that question? How could somebody who knew so much do this? They knew better. Right? This isn't just Solomon. Okay? When we read the scriptures, we don't read from a high moral ground, looking down on others thinking, wow, what an idiot. Though he was incredibly foolish. We look from alongside and we say, what is there here for me to learn? What is there that I can glean from this man's life so that I can not repeat these mistakes? They're here for us to learn, both good and bad. So then it says, as we finish this chapter, this part of the story, it says, the Lord became angry with Solomon because his heart had turned away from the Lord, the God of Israel, who had appeared to him twice. Although he had forbidden Solomon to follow other gods, Solomon did not keep the Lord's command. So the Lord said to Solomon, since this is your attitude, and you have not kept my covenant and my decrees which I commanded you, I will most certainly tear the kingdom away from you and give it to one of your subordinates. What's going to happen now from this point on is the kingdom is going to be torn in two. It's going to be a divided nation. And it's on the back of his disobedience. He ruled and reigned for 40 years. It could have been far longer. And he could have left a legacy that was far greater than what he had. He started well. He just didn't finish well. And I said to you earlier that nobody wakes up and says, you know what, I'd like to wreck all of my most valuable relationships. I'd really like to ruin my life. I'd really like my life to go down in flames. I'd like to leave this as burning ash rubble heap as my legacy to those who come behind me. When they talk about me, they're going to talk about, wow, it was really great, but God, he just couldn't finish the deal. You look back and you think about how there was one point in time in Solomon's life where everybody was coming from all over to hear, to see, to understand. They were in awe. They were drawn. He was God's rock star. He would have exceeded his father David if he had stayed on the path. He didn't stay on the path. His heart was turned. And so, what I want to say to us as I sort of finish this chapter is this. We're living our lives. And some of us are in earlier stages and some of us are in later stages. The story is still being written. There's a legacy that you and I are going to leave, whether we like it or not, and whether it's pleasant or not. There will be things, despite when people gather around our tomb and say a lot of nice things about us, there will be things that people really remember. Our families will be left in a certain shape, based on what happens to us when we depart from this place. I've seen it many, many times. I've experienced it. The way in which we live our lives, the words we speak, our actions, they affect and impact more people than we know. And every place along the way, we are going to leave traces when we are gone of who we were and what we were about. And I just want to ask you now, what is it that you want people to know of you and remember of you? What is it that you want to be said of your legacy? When people read and open the book and they get to your chapter and they talk about your life, how do you want that to read? You know what the most amazing thing about it is you get to determine what people are going to say and read. You get to choose. Because no matter what happens in life, no matter what is thrust upon you, no matter what happens outside of your own control, you get to respond. You get to choose. We make our choices and our choices make us.
Amen.
Right? So as we're moving through our lives, what I want you to think about is where you are and what is going on right now. Some of us are on course with doing the things that will lead us to life, and we just need to stay on course. Long obedience in the same direction. Just stay at it. Sometimes we think to ourselves, gosh, is this really making a difference? Does it really matter? Am I really getting anywhere? Yes, it does matter. Yes, it is making a difference. Yes, you are going somewhere. Stay at it. But then there's some of us, if we were honest enough with ourselves and we looked at our life and we listened to Him closely, we veered somewhere along the way. We might not even be able to trace it all the way back to its origins, but somewhere along the way where people can't see and know and understand there's things that are going on in our lives that aren't as they should be. And I'll just tell you, it doesn't just finish where you are. You start someplace, but it continues to go and go and go until you reach some bitter end unless you, somewhere along the way, make mid-course correction. That's the beautiful thing about the grace of God, is that we get the chance, the opportunity, the choice to make mid-course correction. There is grace and mercy and forgiveness from our Savior, Jesus Christ. He died so that we would live and know life to the full. So if we've wandered off, if we're down the road a little bit, we can turn around. We can make a choice to come back. And then another choice to stay on that right track. I think one of the things that would have helped Solomon a lot was like being in an accountable relationship with somebody who could have said, you know what, Solomon? This idol that you allowed your wife to go worship here in the high hills that you don't see anything of, it's not right. You tolerated that, and now it's only going to build from there. You need to correct that. If somebody would have said, hey, I think one's probably enough for your wives, 2, 3, 4, 10,000. Somewhere along the way, somebody would have said, you know what? I don't think this is honoring to God. You know why he had so many wives? It wasn't that there were so many hot chicks around and he just had to have all of them. In that day and time, there were a lot of like city-states. So whenever you were trying to make alliances with other nations, you would intermarry with them, right? And they would come into your family. So he was cutting lots of deals. It was just another wife. What would another, after you hit 500, what is another wife? Whatever she looks and acts like, what does it matter? Sure. Because he was cutting deals with other nations. Other nations who weren't following the way that he was given from his Lord, from Yahweh, from God. If there was somebody in his life who would have just said, you know what, enough is enough, Solomon. You're the king, but, I mean, no more. And probably in our lives, if there was somebody who knew what was going on in our lives, who we gave the space to say, you know what, I don't like what you're telling me, but it's true, and I need to hear it, and I need to humble myself. Do you have somebody in your life? Do you have a few people in your life who can speak to you in love, not lording over you, not making you feel worse about stuff you already feel bad about anyway, not people you're going to be afraid to share stuff with, people that you can entrust your heart to. If you don't have them, I would say start cultivating a relationship now with somebody that you would want it to be that way. You're not going to find a friend like that overnight, but you need to start cultivating those kind of relationships. Because what's going to happen in your life and in my life is we're going to get too far down the road that we're not going to be sure how to come back from. And the legacy we leave is not going to be the one we want to leave. You see that this 1,000-year-old story is not just about Solomon. It's about us. And it's about our life together. It's about what God wants for us. God has a dream. And He will grow to great lengths to protect the dream. That's why as a community of faith, we need to be people who are caring enough about one another, not busybodies in one another's lives, but care enough about one another that we are helping one another down the road get to the places that we want to be and where God wants us to be. So if you started good, but you're not ending that way, you can make a mid-course correction. And I hope you will. Because your race isn't done, the book's still being written. The chapter is not yet finished on your life. You can still make some choices to end well, and I hope you will. As you think about that, let's pray. Father, thank you for wisdom from Solomon. Thank you that he taught us that we're to guard our hearts, for from it is the wellspring of life. Thank you that he taught us so many things from positive places and even from negative places. We can learn from both. And I just ask you now, in the place that we find ourselves, I just ask you to help us learn and grow. And to become people who are not divided in their hearts towards you, but are completely committed to you and your way of life. Grow us up in the way of your Son. Help us to be more like him every day. And it's in his name